Pretty good.
2 minutes. I'll start with you, since you're senior.
Try to. Not as many as I'd like.
I'm not.
I did about 50. Not bad. Load everything.
What's that?
So maybe there's something to it. I'll be good at
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Kelsey Doom. I'm the president and CEO at the Brookings Area Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to the Public Affairs First Legislative Forum. So we just put them all back to back this year, 1, 2, 3. So this Saturday and the next 2 Saturdays, we will have our legislative forums in this room. Next Saturday is going to be districts 4 and 7, and the following Saturday is again just our district here. So if you have questions, we have Dan Nelson there and Leanne Pierce. Leanne, do you want to raise your hand back there? If you guys have questions, you can raise your hand. They'll get you a slip. You can fill it out, and then they'll grab it back from you, okay? If there's common questions, we're going to be grouping those together and getting them to the moderator. So otherwise, anything else? Awesome. Thanks again. Coffee in the back. I'm not going to guarantee it's good, but it's hot.
Thanks, Kelsey. And thanks, everybody, for being here this morning. This is our first of 3 legislative forums. And so, as Kelsey said, we'll be here three Saturdays in a row. Today's the only one that you're stuck with me, though. So my name is Dan Hansen. I'm proud to serve on the Brookings City Council and also work at SDSU. I'll do my best to work through the questions here as you guys present them. And we will keep this civil and educational so that we get the opportunity to ask questions of our legislators. I want to thank them, not only for their service, obviously, but also thank them for being here today. I know I saw Mary and Julie in the audience, so I want to thank their spouses too. Doug, I'm not sure I didn't see your wife here today, but if she is on, thank her too. If not, I want to thank her from a distance. So they are the ones who really have to keep things running here back in Brookings while you guys are stuck living in Pierre for 40 days. So with that, the way that today will work is we'll start with opening statements from each of the legislators, and then we'll open it up from questions. Kelsey's going to do her best to put the bill up on the screen here in the front so that you guys can follow along, and I'll do my best to say the bill out loud. So with that, we'll start with our senior representative, Representative Reed.
Well, thank you, Dan, and thank you to the Chamber for putting this event on. It's always good to be able to get, when we are back on the weekends, to talk to people about the issues that we are handling in Pierre, and what a great crowd to see. We talk quite a bit about our Cracker Barrels are called sometimes, or forums, and we, except for the larger cities, for a mid-sized city, we always have a great turnout, and I'm very proud of that, so thank you for attending. Just in general, there's 479 bills that were filed this year. 10 of them have been withdrawn already without any hearing or anything, just the sponsor pulled them. That's up 21 in the House and down 5 in the Senate. And so that's kind of interesting that there's a few more in the House, but there's actually less in the Senate from the previous year. And being an election year, you usually expect a few more. There's a lot of discussion on social issues that is taking up time. But a comment is that I think everybody has to realize is that everyone gets to file a bill, and they all get heard. And they do it for what they think their constituents want, or where their issues are at. There's no pocket vetoes at the South Dakota legislature, so they all get at least one hearing. And so, the legislators all have their opinions and ideas. They come from different areas in the state, too. We might have different ideas here than they have in Rapid City or than they have in Burke or all the different small towns. So all of them are elected, just like I am, and they're up for election after this season. So this idea, yes, it does take time to go through those issues, but we really have a good system in South Dakota when it comes to our legislature. Local control has been a hot topic, whether we're talking about giving the counties the ability to tax or the ban on the ban when it comes to plastic bags. We're really talking quite a bit on the House floor, at least, about local control issues and what does that mean. I think we'll probably get into revenue here a little bit, and of course, Representative Post serves on the appropriations, but one-time funds, these are funds that are kind of left over. We had a good increase in sales tax at the end of the year, so there is going to be some one-time funds that are left over, a lot more than was originally thought with the governor's address. But I think one thing that's really good is that we would have had a 3.3% revenue growth for fiscal year 21, and that's a pretty good amount of growth. But we got $20 million that is being reduced because we can no longer tax internet service. That's not remote sales, that's internet service. And so that's really where our big struggle is. But otherwise, we saw good growth in sales tax, which is great for South Dakota. One other interesting note to people in Brookings is the municipal issue with municipal utilities and the rural electric co-ops. They don't like the idea of how, with annexation, you can elect to serve. Several bills have been filed on that. There's one vehicle bill that's sitting out there from the rural electric co-ops. That's actually up for a hearing here soon. There is no body to it yet, so I have no idea what that one's really going to be about. There's several defensive bills that are out there, kind of posturing. I've got one of them that has to do with service standards. If they do take over an area that is right beside a utility, or sorry, close to a city. And there's some good ideas that have been kind of morphed out of the interim session. Representative Anderson is really working hard on a compromise. He's kind of a person that's just right in the middle of the issue and is doing a good job there. So I'm carrying about a dozen bills, which I've realized is probably too many for the year. So campus brewing is going well. That's a bill we're doing for SDSU and School of Mines. My 7-year storage for anonymous rape kits has done very well. It's gone through the House completely. It's gone through Senate committee with absolutely no vote. So I think that's going to be doing pretty well. And then the idea that a 16-year-old can consent to a sexual assault examination is up for the full House next week. Had a really good community hearing, so I think that one's doing very well. So with that, I'll go ahead and see who's next to speak. Thank you.
Thanks, Representative Reed. Senator Post, or Representative Post, almost gave you a change of office there.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. And yes, I'd also like to extend my thanks to not only my wife, who keeps everybody working together, but she's got to manage my crew of teenagers that do the chores while I'm out here.
Move the microphone. Yep, there you go.
Now you talk straight into the ones at Capitol, and you're popping all the time. So, but yeah, I'd really like my family's really been pulling together. As some of you know, I've got 3 teenagers that are the workforce to help my wife get everything done day to day, and then we've got the 2 foster kids at home yet, and we've had a lot of changes and challenges with that, but it continually is another layer of things that have to be taken care of at home, and then you come home and you got to deal with not only littles, but you also deal with all the interests that the big kids have that they come up with while I'm gone. As Tim mentioned, I'm in the Appropriations Committee, and last year I thought things were really, really tough as far as learning all the different moving parts of a $4+ billion budget and how everything fits together between one-time funds and other funds and federal dollars and what's general funds. And of course, general funds are what we pay the most attention to, because those are the tax dollars and fees that come directly from the people of South Dakota initially. Getting into some of the budget numbers, we had revenue setting this past Wednesday, and that's always an interesting thing, because you've got the governor's experts that work in BFM setting revenues, and they work off of more analytical data as far as this is what we had last year, this is what, talking to these industries, what they're seeing going forward, and they make their prediction using all these numbers. And they're trying to forecast out starting in July till next June, end of next June. So you think about that task, that is extremely difficult. And then you've got the LRC staff that takes a little bit of different aspect to it. They look more as trend lines as far as typically what's happened, and they figure more on an idea that things average out over time, and so you just kind of follow curves. And that's very interesting to see that both of those methods that they use to predict that far out in the future on dollars that big, they both came out fairly close. I mean, there was a little bigger gap this year, and some of that leads to uncertainty due to weather. Last year we had a really tough year for farmers and therefore income for farming, and you really realize how much agriculture plays into our state budget. And one of the interesting things is, we don't know next year what effect that the weather's going to have again. We're already building up snow totals and stuff that could lead to a lot of flooding again. And if we end up with FEMA claims and damages and unplanted acres, we could end up with trouble. And one of the other factors that really, made for the difference between the governor's December budget numbers that she put out and then what turns out 2 months later to be a substantial rise in the receipts of the state is because we had a third quarter that was greatly increased, but some of that was crop insurance payments and market facilitation payments that were coming in lieu of some of the trade agreements that were taking a little bit longer to negotiate than they should have. But overall, yeah, things are definitely on an upward trend, and if we're estimating that our dip this summer was caused by the weather, and now we're kind of going to come out of that and level off, but there's always that potential that we dive back into a dip if we have poor weather again coming up this spring. Saying that, the numbers that we adopted, things are looking promising, but there's a lot of negotiations to go on yet. My personal position is still that we have to get to those inflationary rates funding. I've always held that position from beforehand after the governor's budget, that was something that we're just responsible to do. Regardless which side of the political spectrum you come from, if you don't keep up with inflation, you're going to end up governing a crisis. And that's just something that I don't think is acceptable. That's when bad decisions are made, or you end up increasing taxes to get by for 1 year, and then you don't. And then we always seem to find a way. If there's a dollar available, it always gets spent. Because the state really doesn't have a great place to put reserve funds. We got a 10% reserve dollars that we have to have. We're statutory to have that, but we also can't keep any more than that in reserves. And so a lot of states budget on a 2-year rolling budget, and to me, that I can see the advantages of that because you eat up some of those ups and downs that you end up with in a budgetary cycle due to weather or whatever it may be. But overall, I mean, things are promising, but there's still no guarantees because there's still bills to be passed for one-time dollars and other bills out there that are continuing type funding issues that we got to see if those are going to pass or not. And, it all comes down to that final week before we're going to know for sure where our funding levels are going to be. But thank you.
Thank you. Neighbor, Senator Smith.
Thank you, Dan. He is our neighbor. I sit in my chair in my office and I look out and I see the Hansen kids playing left and right, a healthy bunch. Anyway, it's great to be home. I'm one of those guys that looks forward to going to Hy-Vee. When I was back here 2 weeks ago, I bought 9 items, and it took me 2.5 hours to get out of the store. And the reason being is that it's a great place for people to talk to you about what's going on in Pierre. And I like going to Hy-Vee. I expect some kind of discount from Hy-Vee now. This is what I know. Representatives Reed and Post have talked about certain issues, but you need to, and this is what I feel. Brookings, District 7 is 40% Republican, 30% Independent, 30% Democrat. And I just figured when I'm out there, I need to be open. I need to listen to people, and I have to remember where I come from. And where I come from is the most educated district in the state of South Dakota. And that's a reflection on you. You know, this university, led by Barry Dunn, the school district led by Dr. Clint Willert. I'm proud to sit in that seat in Pierre and see Brookings in front of me. And I'm not saying that because other than to mean it. It's an emotional thing for me. You know, I was gone for 2 weeks in a row. I didn't come home last weekend, and thank goodness my wife was with me. Makes Pierre a lot more enjoyable. But when I got home, there were only 3 messages on my answering machine. And that's a good sign. 2 were from people who wanted to buy my book, The Richest Man in Town. And 1 was from a salesman reminding me that I was turning 65 in April and I ought to think about supplemental coverage. You know, the 2 things that education will always be our priority. You know, 50% of the money spent by a state government is on education. And it goes back to what I said a little bit ago. And so that's going to be a priority for me moving forward. But the 2 bills that I have been pushing, one is the Habitat bill. I was amazed that it went through the committee without opposition, and when it hit the floor, the vote was 28-4. It would have been 31-4 had the 3 senators had not been absent. And I was surprised by it. And the other one, obviously, is the driver's exams in Spanish. It's time. It's just flat time. And so I know that a lot of you have read the column. And then finally, the last thing I'd like to say in these introductory remarks is, you know, it's a difficult decision to run for state government or any elected position because it takes time and you open yourself up to a lot of criticism. And some people swatting you on the back once in a while saying, way to go. And I have been hesitant about making my decision to run again because of all that it requires. And frankly, last year, I felt I was inadequate at times. I didn't know enough, and it bothered me. But I made the decision to run again, and so, and I'm not the one who decides whether I go back or not. It's the people of this district. So, but I sure have appreciated representing you in Pierre. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Smith, and that's good news. We are going to start with Senate Bill 157. There's a few questions about that. Title of the bill is an act to revise certain provisions regarding the county zoning and appeals process. The questions here talk about promotion of local governing and local control and some concerns about the possibility of out-of-state corporations affecting our quality of life and potentially affecting our government. So I would normally start with the senator since it comes from the senator, but I see he's pointing to Representative Post, so I will see what Representative Post has to say.
Yeah, the Senate Bill 157 will make it, I think there's some misconceptions on what this is about. I haven't dug into it completely yet, but there's some of the stuff that I've been working on previously, as well as my family, and has always been real active in promoting agriculture in the state. As I mentioned earlier in my budget address, we really need to get more, whether it be dairies or hog barns or chickens and turkeys, in our rural areas. We're running into some issues with permitting. I haven't been through this process, but there's many steps that have to be taken in order to get a permit to put up a modern agricultural facility. And by the time you go through the state permitting through the DNR, they have to go through and check off all these different things. Do you have enough clay underneath where your facility is going to be put? If you don't have to put clay, you got to put plastic liners in order to contain any leaks or spills or anything that could possibly damage the water or the environment. It's an extensive list of things that you have to check off, and they're heavily regulated. Now, once those are done at the state level and you completely got your permit, then at the same time, you're working through the county permitting process. And the county permitting process, every county can pass regulations that they want to see on these type of facilities to be built. If I'm remembering everything correctly, the counties can set setbacks. So, okay, you've got to build this facility at least so many feet, miles, whatever it be, determined by the county from your closest neighbor. Other things that have to be considered, I believe, are like where wells are. If somebody has a well in the middle of a pasture, that could affect where you can place this facility. Some of those things end up being voted on by either zoning boards or the county commission themselves acting as the zoning board if they don't have a specific zoning board. They're political beings too. And sometimes pressure by local people that don't want it to go through affects their decisions on things that should be just a statutory, look, okay, you're set back 1.5 miles or you're set back 3/4 of a mile from these type of things. You meet all the qualifications that have been passed into law, but we're having trouble getting permits done after a pile of investments. Some of these investments in permitting have cost upwards of $1 million just to get the site studies done. And then you have a political beef between two neighbors, ended up being your decision on how or when a facility can go forward. I haven't read the entire bill, but what I've been told about is that it clears up some of those things, but right now it takes a supermajority by either that zoning board or that county commission to pass this through. This simply reduces these larger facilities down to a 50% vote. Whether or not, and the vote's supposed to be on whether or not you meet these requirements. It's not a personal feeling. It's like, well, I don't like that guy, or his dad had a beef with me over 1/4 of ground 30 years ago. Those type of things have played into decisions before. And it's gotten very vicious in this state at times. We've got 2 townships down in Yankton County that want to succeed from their county because they have numerous people that want to develop their farms the way they feel fit, according to all the environmental regulation that's put out there, and their county commission won't let them do it. It's their land, they meet all the regulations, and they just can't get a permit through the county. And we got to remember what the upside is. We used to prioritize in this state to develop out our railroads so that we can export grain. And looking back, that was a horrible idea. We need to develop either animal agriculture or ethanol or soybeans or whatever it may be, and develop these products in our state. That's where we become a very successful state. When you look around, especially in appropriations, I continually hear, well, how come we don't fund, whether it be education or you name it, our community support providers or nursing homes or any of these type of things? How come we don't fund at the same rate as North Dakota? Well, North Dakota's got an extra source of income that we don't have, which in their oil wells. You look into Minnesota. Minnesota has an income tax. They take another percentage off of everybody's income, and that's how they do that. And in income tax to fund state type priorities, it's like, here, I'm going to take $1,000 from you, but I'll give you $1,000 of benefits back. That's not necessarily as advantageous as you might think. Nebraska hasn't done anything to reform their property taxes. We've got farms and ranches and business people in the agricultural community going broke in Nebraska just to be able to, pay their property taxes. So, Wyoming's got coal mines. They're pulling the fees off of the coal mines. Just every state around us has an additional source of income to help fund these programs that everyone's come to expect. And South Dakota needs to process our agricultural products here. That's pretty much what's behind the bill, as far as if we're going to continue to grow and be a vibrant economy, we need to take that next step. We need to run our grains through cattle or livestock. We need to process the livestock here. And every time we do that, that adds dollars that float around in our economy and make us more money and more prosperous state.
Just opening up to either of you if you have any additional comments.
Sure. I've just started studying the bill. Spent quite a bit of time on it yesterday, comparing the notes and what we're receiving from everybody to the actual bill. So I'm not an expert in the bill yet, but it is something that's going to have to be gone through very carefully. A lot of what Representative Post said is what the main parts of this bill is, and I do agree that we have to continue to find ways to consume what we produce here in the state, or at least add a step of value to it if we want the economy. What the things that I've seen in the bill as I've been studying it, really it has a lot of clarifications. An example is a clarification in days for how long it takes for a body to make a decision. I mean, companies need an answer, and that wasn't in code, so that's been clarified in there. The permitted use that Representative Post talked about, a lot of counties are already using permitted use. This just clarifies it and says this is how permitted uses will work with a county. So it does that. It also gets away from some of the lawsuits where somebody doesn't really have standing. They've just come in from the outside and want to sue to slow down the process. And so you have to be an aggrieved person in the process is how it's defined. So what I'm looking through, it seems like a pretty good bill. It's going to have to continue to study it and listen to what everybody has to say. But the idea behind it is we do need to consume more of our products. If we're producing the feed for cattle, for chickens, for pork, then we need to be able to consume that here because it'll have a better value to the economy.
Thank you. Next is House Bill 1235. It references vaccinations and essentially allows or changes the law as it currently states to where no child entering public or non-public school or public or non-public early childhood education in this state may be required to receive any immunization or medical procedure for enrollment. And the questions here are asking about your level of support or lack thereof, and that's essentially what they're asking in summary. So I see it only has one sponsor, so I don't know that it will get very far, but Senator Smith?
Thank you. This is a difficult one for a lot of people. I suppose it's interesting now that the coronavirus is so much in the news today, and at the time that this is being decided upon. It hasn't come over to our side yet. I don't even know where it is. Have you voted on the House yet? No.
Still in committee.
Okay. I know there's been discussion about it. I personally, I remember when I was a kid and took the sugar cubes in the lunchroom in Eureka to protect ourselves against polio. And it was amazing what that did, because I would see people that had suffered from the disease for years, and we don't see that now. And so I know there are a lot of people that are against forced vaccinations, making decisions for their children, but I think there's a greater good that has to be served. And so someone needs to get in my ear and tell me otherwise. Otherwise, my position would be pro-vaccination. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Post?
Yeah, I guess I would just echo that. With my experiences in the livestock industry, you can tell very quickly when you've got a group of cows going through that miss, and that may be callous to compare it to livestock, but it's vaccinations. If you wean a group of cows and you forget or thought you already did it to vaccinate a group of cows, and then you commingle them into a group setting like would be comparable to a school, you can really have a train wreck. And I understand the medical freedom portion of it, but I believe there's adequate exemptions already built into our state law, and that should be good enough. I would hope this bill ends up
Representative Reed?
unvaccinated.
I'll echo the comments that have been made already. It's funny, they use herd as a term, not just for cattle herd. So actually, it's the same thing. It's
Herd,
the same thing.
yeah.
You're exactly right on this bill. So yeah, I also am against 1235. I think there's religious exemptions, there's medical exemptions that are in it that do protect some people that may have the issue with it. So I'll also be against it. Just a comment that was made about sponsorships. If you're looking at bills this year, don't get too wrapped up in sponsorships because we have a totally different system in how we do sponsorships. And for example, I had a bill that I was for, came to committee, I ended up voting against it. I could have just taken my name off of it after that. So, now I don't want my name associated with it. And so you can come on and come off. And there's a lot going on there. So don't, at least this year, I think everybody's got to get comfortable with sponsorships and how they're going to handle it, but don't get too wrapped up in it. If you see a bill with no sponsors or all of a sudden you see sponsorships change, we've got to get that figured out with the new system.
Thank you. Yes, herd immunity is important. The next one is actually two bills. The one I'm reading is House Bill 1266. On the Senate side, it's Senate Bill 147. This deals with collective bargaining rights of Board of Regents employees. Currently, as the law is written, it allows employees of Board of Regents to have collective bargaining rights, and as this bill is currently proposing, it would add Board of Regents employees to the list of people who are not allowed to participate in collective bargaining negotiations. Representative Reed?
Thank you. So I voted against this 2 years ago, and will be the same unless something really important is put in front of me. I think what's important to note is this isn't collective bargaining on wages and a few other things. It's really on more of the specifics of the job and how they're handled. I know there's just a lot of folks that are concerned with what's going on with the universities and declining enrollment. Can we stay flexible enough if there's collective bargaining? Those are the kind of discussions that's been going on with it. But I was against it 2 years ago, and I'll be against it again.
Thank you. Representative Post, anything to add?
Not really. I guess I haven't looked at it that closely, but Tim sounds like he's got a handle on it.
Interesting. In my previous life, I actually was a young man. And I remember back in the mid-'70s when Cohee was a big topic of discussion on college campuses. And Dr. Bob Locker was an enormous proponent. And I had heard as a student that if they were allowed to continue, the world would come to an end. And it hasn't. And so unless somebody can give me a really good idea, a reason why, I will be voting against those particular pieces of legislation.
Thank you. The next one, since we're talking about Board of Regents, is House Bill 1251. It's titled An Act to Establish Membership of the Board of Regents. I believe it involves reducing the number of members as well as the term length, and also potentially eliminates the student representative on the Board of Regents. So, thoughts on that? Representative Reed?
Haven't really heard too much discussion about this yet within members of the House. So I'm not sure exactly where it's coming from. I have concerns, especially with, I think it's great to have a student regent on the board. I don't know the number of people on the board. That can be discussed. I'm worried about all of a sudden making a one-time change and completely changing the board. I don't think that's wise. Also, the political split. I don't know if we want to do that, and then make this a practice to where, well, new legislator comes in, new body, along with the new governor. Whoop, we're just going to wipe everybody out and start all over. I don't think those things are wise to do. It also takes out having a local representative. So basically, nobody from Brookings County could serve on that board. And I think there's a good information flow as long as everybody in all of the different counties that have the that have the schools are represented. I think that's a fair way, and I think it's a good way of getting information out and understanding how what happens affects the community. So, in general, I'm against this, but you know, I'm going to be listening to any debate that there is on it, but I haven't heard any debate as of yet.
Thank you. Any other comments? Representative Post?
Yeah, I guess I haven't really looked into this bill. I did catch the part in conversation with somebody about eliminating county, or, you know, SDSU couldn't have a Brookings representative. I mean, to me, that's some of the people that are most knowledgeable about our universities reside in the counties of the universities, so that would be a major problem for me right away. We are having some discussions on administration in our university system. There's another bill out there that's somewhat related to this, Senate Bill 55, that's talking about combining presidents in our two Western university systems. There is, I don't know if that particular case is viable or not, but it has sparked some discussion as far as how our universities are managed between either the central office, the Board of Regents, or our universities, that we may be getting a little top-heavy in administration. But that's just one of those discussions that's happening anytime you got a tight budget year and you start looking for dollars. I have no idea where it's actually going to go or end up with anything. It'd probably be something that has to be studied and looked at further down the road instead of an immediate decision with a bill.
Yeah, I think 55 is still in committee. Senator Smith?
Thank you. Again, I hearken back to my youth. I remember when this was in place that no member of the Board of Regents would come from any of the counties. And if memory serves me correct, I believe former Mayor Roger Prunty was the first one, I'm thinking, that was brought to the Board of Regents and allowed to be in one of the counties. But here's the deal. I was also there when they brought on the first student regent. Oh my. People were just nervous that this person didn't possibly have the correct amount of knowledge. But they were the consumer. Students are the consumer. And they ought to have a voice in what they're consuming. And so sometimes I think in the legislature, certain people like to meddle in places, just to meddle in places. Something rubs them wrong. And there ought to be a bill about that, and here they come. So I will be opposing such measures.
Spoken as a true former student body vice president. Next, I'm going to start with Senator Smith. You addressed this in your opening comments, but I know you did have a moving letter to the editor recently in the paper about Senate Bill 70. So open the floor to you, allow you to make any additional comments you'd like, and then open it up to our representatives to get their feelings on the bill as well.
And I appreciate the question. I pretty much said how I felt, and I was amazed. The only negative comments, because I got a bunch of positive comments over it, the only negative comment I got was the person who sent me that tough Facebook post in the first place that I was responding to. That was, and so that was the only negative. I was proud. Last year there were 19 senators who voted in the affirmative, and this time around it was 24. And picking up 5 is huge, especially in an election year. And I think slowly the hearts begin to melt. And I would like to think that one day it's going to be an exciting thing. At the end of that column I wrote that all these people, these recent immigrants, want to do is go to work and take their children to school. And I've thought a lot about that and take their children to school. Wouldn't it be a remarkable thing? Isn't it a remarkable thing that the children go to school to learn English and come home and teach mom and dad? You talk about a bonding exercise. And so I am, when people ask me if I would consider sponsoring it, I jumped at the chance because, again, I remember where I come from. Thank you.
Thank you.
I
Representative Post?
I don't come from it exactly the same point of view. To me, a lot of the people that want to hire these people that are not English speaking are doing so at a discount because of their lack of skills in English. I'm not sure I'm necessarily completely against the bill, but I would like to see something where we don't just, okay, you can take the test in Spanish and now you never have to learn English, because not learning English is a major hindrance
Let him speak, please.
in advancing in this society. It's always going to be a handicap, and it's going to keep you from moving ahead and becoming the full potential that you have. It is possible they can learn English after they've already got their Spanish driver's license. I understand that. But it would just be one more thing that we need to remember, that until we're fully functioning with the language of this nation, you're going to be held back. And to me, that's a terrible situation to leave people in, that you're just going to stay there and you're not going to learn English and you're not going to move forward by making it easier.
Representative Reed?
I just always let VJ speak on this issue. I'm really not much more to add, but yeah, I'll be supporting this bill. I just hope that it gets a good hearing in the House. I am a little worried about that. And then I want it to come to the floor, because I want to have that discussion on the floor. So I will be supporting it, and I just really hope I get the chance to support it on the House floor.
Senator Smith?
Just a postscript. I've read that the U.S. Census Bureau is predicting that by the year 2045, that white people will be the minority in this country. Guess who's coming to dinner? And I would like to think there's a welcome mat. It continues to be a welcome mat. And remembering that on our coins it says e pluribus unum, out of many one. And especially more so in this district than a lot of places. And again, another reason why I like living here, even when it's 20 below.
All right, the next one is a question that brings together three different bills all around child support. We have House Bill 1146 as well as House Bill 1147. 1146 talks about whether or not a person's second job would be allowed to be used in the calculation of mandatory child support payment, and 1147 deals with abatement of basic child support and changes the rules about when child support can be abated. And then I believe Senate Bill 145, in my quick glance at it, kind of combines those two House bills together. So House Bill 1146 and 1147 question basically really gets at, and not to get too far into the weeds, but that Governor Noem is required to convene a child support commission every 4 years, and that will happen here in 2020. They're tasked with making recommendations to be considered by the following year's legislature. And so the question around is, should we really be waiting for the commission around child support, the Child Support Commission, to make recommendations to next year's legislature before we make determinations on bills like this? Representative Reed?
The bills like this were in judiciary, which I served in a couple of years ago. So I really took a deep dive into a lot of the different laws that we had at that time. I don't think they've changed too much since then, and found that we're in very good shape with how we do our child support, figuring child support out. We have to focus on the child. This isn't about the parents fighting; it's about the child. And I think our judicial system is set up well to handle those issues. So most changes, I haven't read these bills directly to understand them, but in general, I think we're in really good shape with those bills. And that's what happened at least 2 years ago. It's okay. It's fine to have the discussion about it. And I do agree. The reason why we were looking at some of the laws and some of the changes had to do with it. It just finished up that commission work, and that commission work had some changes to how child support is figured. And I remember there was quite a battle, and it hadn't been updated for years, and they needed to have some changes with it. And so I do, if that's what one of the bills about, let's wait for that to actually get called and let those folks do their work. They do very good work when they do it. But again, this is some bills that will have to really take a deep dive in if they make it to the House floor.
Thank you. Representative Post? No?
Yeah, I guess I haven't seen these yet at all, so.
Senator Smith?
I've heard those bills are on the other side, and like Representative Post, I haven't studied them at all. Thank you.
The next question, let me get to my correct spot here, deals with Senate Bill 111, and the title of the bill here is Exclude Certain Wind Energy Tax Revenue from the State Aid to Education Formula. And the question was, what was the basis for the defeat of this bill on the floor? And then they waged their opinion that wind revenue should remain at least partially within the school district. Senator Smith?
Thank you. I can about imagine who wrote that question. Oh, I'm getting the no. That wasn't me. You know, to give a little background, when the wind farms, and full disclosure, I don't like the wind farms. I'm sorry, but they're a necessary part of how we live in energy independence. I get it, but a lot of times I think they've stolen the sunset, and so that's just the codger in me, but that's okay. But the background is this, is that when they went in, at one time, the money was, a part of the money, I don't know the percentage, would go back to the school districts, and then in time, with the deal that was struck, in time it would be reduced to 80%, 60%, 40%, then 20%, and then zero. And I understand why the school districts which have those wind farms would want this to remain, because in an era of paucity of resources, you try to find what you can to support your schools. And I get that. I voted for it. It was Senator Wick's motion. I voted for it in committee. And after you vote for something in committee, oh my goodness, do the people come out and they get in your ear, you're reminded about the deal that was struck in 2016, taking all of these elements into consideration, and then ultimately deciding on an increase of 0.5 cent for sales tax, with the idea that this additional money to those schools that have those wind farms in their backyards, it would go away. And you're reminded of that. And so when it hit the floor, I voted against it. It was one of those I felt terrible about voting against it. But again, sometimes you have to look at it from a global set of eyes rather than a local. Because I'm one of those people that have talked in all those schools. I've talked in almost every school in South Dakota. I've seen the haves and I've seen the have-nots. And I've seen the small schools just trying to survive. And I got to tell you, there's a bigger issue here, ladies and gentlemen. We got to figure out how we're going to do this in South Dakota. Because on the other hand, and this gets away from this a little bit, but there's a district in South Dakota, I'm not going to identify the one, but there's a district in South Dakota that in the last 8 years, in that district, there are 14 towns. And in the last 8 years, 12 of those towns have built schools. It's not sustainable. And we have to figure out how we can make this whole thing work. You know, in Wyoming, they have 39 counties. They have 39 school districts. They have beautiful facilities. Of course, they have gas and oil, and we have rocks. But we're going to have to figure this whole thing out. We really do. And it's going to require courage on the part of a lot of people to make some tough decisions. Reminding ourselves that the ultimate goal is a quality education for those kids, and set aside our differences and move on. But anyway, that's probably a longer answer than you wanted to hear, but there we go.
Representative Post.
Yeah, thank you. I would just, I didn't get a chance to see this bill other than knowing that Senator Wick was carrying it. But I would agree that when I talk school education funding with different superintendents and board members throughout the state, that I don't know, it's probably dangerous to say, but the Blue Ribbon Task Force, maybe they were a little, the blue ribbon may not have been exactly, being a 4-H kid, maybe been a little bit, little lofty in their designation there. It's really not working. We, in the next few years, need to reevaluate the school funding formulas because we've got all kinds of we've found a new set of variables that aren't equalized now, and our schools just aren't. You got to balance it with, you got to have the state constitution ensures a free K through 12 education, and you have to decide what distance do you need to. I mean, if you have to drive an hour and a half both ways to school, is that still a free education? I don't know. I mean, we got to start looking at a lot of different options and reevaluate this thing somehow. I'm not claiming to have the solutions, but there's a lot of problems with school funding right now.
Representative Reed.
I agree with what's been talked about. Also, one thing to not forget is this was part of the package that got the half penny completed. And I do believe that we need to stick with that, but I also know that there are troubles in the formula, and we need to figure it out. And whether or not it's returning this income back directly to the districts that they're in, or what we're going to do, but it has to be looked at. This is one issue that has to be looked at globally, because it's interesting to get a large school legislator and a small school legislator in the same room and watch them fight about things. And it's amazing. They'll talk right past each other, too, on things. And so globally is what has to be looked at with this. And the half penny has to stay. And then we need to figure out the best way on formulas. And then we also need to take a look at sparsity issues that we have.
You guys are awesome. The next question was about educational funding, so you guys did a good job. Way to go. It's like you're pros at this or something. All right. It is, I think, 9:53 according to my watch, and so we have time for one more question. I will take all of the questions that were not asked today, and there are quite a few, and I apologize that we didn't get to all of them, and give them to Kelsey so that they can be shared with next week's moderator, so that we can ensure that all of the issues, or as many of the issues as possible, can get addressed. I would like to indulge a self-interest and ask a question about Senate Bill 72. There were a couple questions about this. This is in reference to the need-based scholarship at colleges and universities, and just get thoughts on Senate Bill 72. Senator Smith?
Well, it's an interesting one. I've told this to people before, I would have never qualified for any academic scholarship when I went to school. You have to have the one thing that bothers me, and I am for this. Okay, let's start out with I am for this, but I got to tell you this: we ought to have a scholarship that's called the Triers. I'm dead serious, because there are a lot of young people that are in school that were like me, having attention deficit disorder. No one had to diagnose that for me. I figured it out in the 4th grade. You know what Terry Redlin, the great artist, they used to call him Windows Redlin. He was an average student because he was always looking out the window. And so he thought it was hilarious. They named a school after him in Sioux Falls. He did. It's a true story. But I think sometimes we miss people that do things in school, in grade school, elementary school, high school, and they are important parts of our classes. They are the doers, and because they fall a little short on the academic scale, they don't get the same assistance that other people do. So I was somewhat jesting about the Trier Scholarship, but I'm all for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Post?
Thank you. this bill came before us last year. It's been improved. I think there are some things that I like about it that's a little bit better shape. But I went to SGSU and I graduated in 4 years, and I had to sell off cows as I went through because that was my college fund. One thing that I can't help but keep thinking about in the back of my mind is watching the other students that were in college with me, is that when they had employment in order to pay their tuition, it greatly advanced how much they paid attention in class. You've got to have some personal buy-in. When you start looking at higher education in this state through our university systems, first we have a state purchase that buys down tuition. That's at least $5,500 per student. Maybe Black Hills is a little bit less. So you've got that. Now you're talking about a Pell Grant, which is another $6,000 before you're even eligible for this scholarship, the way I'm understanding it. Then there's still eligibilities for other scholarships on top of that. And then my daughter is currently in this process of selecting a college and where she's going to go to school, and she enrolled in the Air National Guard in order to help her through school. And then I expect that once she just turned 18 and then she comes back to do chores for me, she's going to expect to get paid, or else she'll find a different job. But I think we can't put away or forget about the value of having buy-in in your own education when it gets to this age. When you're over 18 years old, if this is something that you really want to help improve your life, having that buy-in has got to help retention. As far as this is something I've done, I've made it through 2 years, I've made it through 3 years. I'm going to finish because I've worked too hard for this education to just let it slip. There may be some room for some need-based scholarship. There is some of that available through the private sector, but in a year where we're struggling to even get K-12 paid for, I'm not sure this is a correct step to take.
Representative Reed.
Thank you. I do think this is an important bill. A lot of it has to do with workforce. We have students that are leaving the state and they're going to other schools. I've talked specifically to parents that have showed me the numbers and how their child's got, because of these kind of scholarships, go to Promise-like scholarships, that they've gone to a different school or are going to a different school. There's been some good changes to the program too. This is some of the information that's been handed out about it from last year. Some really good changes. The max amount that can come out of this is $2,500. That's the maximum. It has to be matched by private, so private organizations have to get involved with this. And you can't, it has to be based on financial need. You're not going to get more money than financial need, and usually work-study work is part of that. It also tightens it up to make sure that these are students that when you're putting money on a student like this, and the doers isn't going to work for a scholarship like this. You're going to have some good academic credentials to come into it because you're investing state money into it. And so I believe this is a good thing to do, but priority-wise this year, I'll vote for it. I'll probably end up coming to us with $1 on it and then let appropriations figure out if there is money for it. This can't be one-time funds. This has to be continuous because that person that got it this year needs to know that it's there for the next year. And so it's going to be tough on the financial part of it, but the concept of it needs to stay alive, and hopefully we can get ourselves into a position that we can fund a scholarship like this.
Follow up.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up. It's currently written at $2 million this year, but you have to remember it adds on every year till you get to 4 years. So it's going to be $2 million, and then for the first year, and then you're going to have 2 years with the students, so you have $4 million. Then you're going to get to $6 million, and then close to $8 million. $8 million right now is half of what we need to get to 2% on teacher pay in K through 12. That just continually throughout the future is going to be there as a dollar amount that takes away from other needs the state has.
All right, so it's 10 o'clock. Ask you guys maybe just to wrap up. If there's another, just kind of wrap up, I guess. If there's a question you want to readdress, you're welcome to do that as well. But give you a minute and maybe start in reverse order. So Senator Smith, if you want to go first.
Well, I appreciated being here this morning. I see so many friends in the audience. And I'm reminded again by the size of the group and the intelligence of the group. Pretty sharp people in District 7. And from a selfish standpoint, if there are any Republicans in this group that would like to see me run again, would like to sign my petition, I have them here. It'll save me a couple trips to Hy-Vee. Thank you very much.
Representative Post.
Thank you. I guess I'd just like to add, I read every email that comes through that has a Brookings address on the top of it. Please include information that you'd like me to hear about that bill. I'll definitely read it. I'm probably not going to reply to very many of them, but I will be taking that input into my decision making and help me look further into a bill. It's like, oh, that's something I didn't think about. But it's, I hate to use the appropriations cop-out, but we start at 7:15 every morning. We end up running right through till the end of session. Sometimes if nice people bring food into the Capitol, I get a chance to eat. But it gets to be a very, very long day, and I greatly appreciate all the input, but I just can't respond to everything, because some days there'll be 100 emails in one day, and if you start picking and choosing which ones you reply to, then but if you just make sure you include whatever information that's pertinent, and I will get it read. So thank you.
Representative Reed.
Well, thank you all for coming. It's great. It's always great to see such a good crowd here for our forums. And I'm glad that we're just going to carry the questions over. Man, it's good that we're having 3 in a row here so we can just continue to carry the questions over. That's a really good idea so we can get to more of the questions. And of course, we'll stick around, or I'll stick around. I'm sure these two will also, if you have any questions that you want to ask us directly. Also on correspondence, this has been a tough year in correspondence. I'm carrying more bills than I've carried before, and so I'm also having a tough time. But I do read all the emails, try to respond to them as I can. It's always good, and if you repeating what Representative Post said, put the address on the top. That way we know what to get in. And the form letters, if you're coming, a lot of times if you're going through a system to reach us, where you can look up your legislator and then send an email, that actually gets thrown over into the trash, or into not the trash, but the junk mail files, which is too bad, but it sees the address that's coming through, and somehow it knows. So a lot of times I don't get those till after the bill's gone through. So you can look us up on the internet, on the LRC site, what our address is. Send them directly to us. That always make sure that they get through. And I'll try to get back to you. But again, this year it's been a really tough year to keep up with correspondence. I want to thank my wife, for all the work that she does, keeping everything going around here when I'm gone. And I also will be running. Haven't officially announced, but I also will be running for my seat again. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to all 3 of you for your service. As a professional educator, I feel it's important for me to say that the beauty of our form of government is that we're allowed to disagree on issues and process, and at the end of the day, through civil discourse, we'll have a good discussion and end up in a better place than we would have otherwise. And so I encourage all of you, even if you disagree with something that was said or a thought that was shared, to have a conversation with the people that represent you, and at the end of the day, all of us are allowed to collect the signatures just like them and put our name on the ballot and throw our hat in the race. So have a good day, enjoy your weekend, and enjoy the 30-degree sunshine outside. So.